Political tribalism and the two-party system. The psychology of political tribalism, identity over policy. Modern political affiliation functions less like a policy preference and more like a core identity marker, similar to religion, ethnicity, or nationality. Social sorting. Americans have increasingly clustered. Party affiliation now correlates strongly with religion, race, geography, education level, and even consumer preferences. A Democrat and Republican in 1960 might have lived next door. Today, they likely live in different neighborhoods, watch different media, and shop at different stores. Effective polarization. People don't just disagree with the other party, they dislike them personally. Studies show increasing discomfort with children marrying someone from the opposing party, willingness to discriminate in hiring based on party, viewing the other party as a genuine threat to the nation. Motivated reasoning. Once tribal identity takes hold, people process information to protect their group. Facts that challenge the in-group are rejected. Facts that harm the out-group are amplified. This happens across the spectrum. The outrage feedback loop. Human brains are wired for threat detection. Political content that triggers fear or anger generates higher engagement, more shares, stronger memory retention, dopamine responses. This creates an arms race where the most inflammatory voices get amplified while nuance gets buried. I'd like to note that that is why the Greek democracy failed, and largely you had certain individuals come out and were just so extreme in their beliefs and loud in their beliefs that it drowned out actual rational thought, and people are motivated by emotion. And so if you're more emotional within your speech, people tend to vote for you more. I think we have a great example of that as our president currently. He ran, and when he debated, he would just insult others, and others didn't know how to react to it. He seemed so confident and all of this. And he was also a famous figure beforehand. So people knew his face, were familiar with his antics and all this, and the confidence won him the election twice. Structural incentives creating division. The two-party lock-in. The U.S. system virtually guarantees two dominant parties through Duverger's law, winner-take-all. Single-member district elections mathematically trend toward two parties. Third parties become spoilers rather than viable alternatives. Ballot access laws. Major parties have erected significant barriers for third-party candidates, signature requirements, filing fees, debate thresholds. The primary problem. Only 20% of eligible voters participate in primaries. These voters skew more ideologically extreme. Candidates must appeal to bases, not general electorate. This pulls both parties away from the median voter. Gerrymandering's role. When districts are drawn to be safe for one party, general elections become irrelevant. The only real competition is the primary. Representatives fear challenges from their flank, not the center. Compromise becomes politically dangerous. The result: representatives are incentivized to perform partisan combat rather than legislate. So they're incentivized to argue within their party and not incentivized to argue for the people. Media ecosystem fragmentation. The business model problem. Attention is the product sold to advertisers. Conflict and outrage drive attention. Nuance and complexity lose to simplicity and drama. Each side develops its own facts, experts, and narratives. Algorithmic amplification. Social media rewards engagement. Inflammatory content engages more. Filter bubbles reinforce existing beliefs. Cross-cutting exposure decreases. Who benefits from division? The donor class and regulatory capture. Here's a critical observation. While the public fights over cultural wedge issues, there's remarkable bipartisan consensus among elites on economic matters. Consider bank bailouts passed with both parties' support, trade agreements supported by establishment wings of both parties, defense spending increases rarely face serious opposition, pharmaceutical and insurance industry influence spans both parties, tax code complexity benefits those who can afford lawyers. The strategy: elevate cultural issues that provoke tribal responses, let economic policy be shaped in quieter arenas, ensure that regardless of electoral outcomes, certain interests remain protected. The politician's dilemma: elected officials face perverse incentives. Fundraising, outrage emails, and fear-based appeals generate donations. Media coverage: conflict gets airtime, compromise does not. Base activation: mobilizing your tribe is easier than persuading the middle. Career safety: working with the other side risks primary challenges. Many politicians privately acknowledge the dysfunction but feel trapped by the system's incentives. The overlooked common ground. Polling consistently shows broad public agreement on issues that see little legislative movement, such as money in politics reform, 75 to 85% public support, minimal legislative action. Drug pricing negotiation, 80% plus public support. Legislative action limited. Infrastructure investment, 70% plus public support. Legislative action sporadic. Background checks for guns, 80 to 90% public support. Legislative action stalled. Term limits, 75% public support. Legislative action, none. The question: why does popular consensus fail to translate into policy? Tribalism provides cover. Each side blames the other side while systemic issues persist. Historical context. It wasn't always this way. The mid-20th century featured more ideological overlap. Liberal Republicans existed, Rockefeller Republicans, conservative Democrats existed, Southern Democrats, cross-party coalitions formed on specific issues, personal relationships across the aisle were common. What changed? 1960s to the 70s. Civil rights realignment began sorting parties by racial attitudes. The 80s to 90s, Newt Gingrich confrontational style rewarded. Rise of talk radio, cable news competition. The 2000s to present. Social media acceleration, geographic sorting intensified, economic anxiety increased, cultural conflict. The manufactured divide. Wedge issues as weapons. Certain issues are elevated not because they affect most people's daily lives, but because they trigger strong emotional responses, create clear in-group, out-group markers, are difficult to compromise on, distract from economic concerns where elite and public interests diverge. The pattern. 1. Identify culturally divisive issue. 2. Frame it as existential threat. 3. Paint other side as evil, not merely wrong. 4. Use issue to mobilize base. 5. Actual policy substance becomes secondary to tribal signaling. The false binary. Many issues are presented as binary when reality is more complex. You can support police reform and public safety. You can want broader security and humane immigration policy. You can value tradition and embrace progress. You can support markets and want regulation. The tribal frame collapses these nuances into us versus them. Paths forward. Structural reforms, ranked choice voting, reduces spoiler effect, allows third-party voting without wasting votes. Open primaries broadens electorate beyond partisan bases. Independent redistricting removes gerrymandering incentives. Campaign finance reform reduces donor influence. Cultural shifts, media literacy, understanding how attention economy shapes content. The Polarization initiatives, organizations like Braver Angels facilitating cross-partisan dialogue. Local engagement, municipal politics often less tribal, more problem-solving oriented. Individual actions, seek out good faith voices from opposing perspectives. Notice when you're being triggered for engagement. Focus on policy substance over tribal signaling. Build relationship across political lines. The psychology of uniting against negativity as a binding force. The evolutionary foundation. Survival wiring. Our brains evolved in environments where threats could kill us. This created fundamental asymmetries in how we process positive versus negative information. The detection trade-off. Imagine two of your ancestors on the savannah. Ancestor A assumes rustling grass is wind, continues gathering food. Ancestor B assumes rustling grass might be a predator, runs away. If it's actually wind, A gains a bit more food, B loses a bit of energy. If it's actually a lion, A would die, B would survive. The asymmetry principle. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's landmark paper, Bad is Stronger Than Good, documented this across domains. In the domain of attention, the negative perception threat captures focus faster. Positive rewards require more exposure. The domain of memory, negative traumatic events recalled vividly. Positive, pleasant events fade faster. The domain of learning, one bad experience creates lasting avoidance. Many good experiences needed for a habit to form. The domain of relationships. One betrayal can end trust. Trust builds slowly over time. The domain of impressions. Single negative trait dominates, while in the positive, multiple positive traits needed to compensate. Core psychological mechanisms. 1. Loss aversion. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky demonstrated that losses feel approximately twice as painful as equivalent gains feel good. Example, finding $100 feels good. Losing $100 feels roughly twice as bad. Political translation. They will take something from you is more motivating than we will give you something. Protecting what you have beats gaining something new. Fear of loss mobilizes faster than hope of gain. Negative bias in attention. Your brain literally processes negative stimuli differently. Speed, threatening faces are recognized faster than happy faces. Attention, negative information captures and holds focus much longer. Weight. Single negative piece of information disproportionately affects overall judgment. Research example. Show someone 10 positive traits and 1 negative trait about a person. The negative trait will disproportionately shape their overall impression. 3. Emotional mobilization hierarchy. Not all emotions mobilize equally. High mobilization, fear, anger, disgust, contempt. Lower mobilization, hope, inspiration, gratitude, and contentment. The negative emotions create urgency. They demand action now. Positive emotions allow relaxation, which is precisely why they don't drive people to the polls, to donate, or to share content. The disgust response. Moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt has shown that disgust, originally evolved to avoid contaminated food and disease, has been co-opted for social and political judgments. When people describe opposing views, they often use contamination language, poisoning society, sick ideology, disgusting behavior, cleaning up politics. This triggers visceral physical responses that bypass rational deliberation. Social dynamics of negative bonding. The common enemy effect. Groups cohere faster and more intensely when facing a shared threat than when pursuing a shared goal. Why this works. Clarity. Enemies are concrete, visions are abstract. Urgency. Threats demand immediate response, goals can wait. Simplicity, stop them, is clearer than build something complex. Identity, defining who you're not is easier than defining who you are. Historical pattern. Notice how wartime creates national unity that peacetime never does. External threats suppress internal divisions. The enemy of my enemy. Coalitions built on shared opposition are remarkably effective at uniting otherwise incompatible groups. Political examples. The Trump coalition in 2016 united economic populists, religious conservatives, anti-establishment libertarians, immigration restrictions. What bound them? Opposition to. Political establishment, cultural elites, the system. The anti-Trump coalition united progressive activists, moderate suburbanites, never-Trump conservatives, apolitical citizens. What bound them? Opposition to Trump himself. These coalitions contain internal contradictions that would surface immediately if they had to build something together, but opposing something papers over those differences. Negative partisanship. The data. Political scientists Alan Abramowitz and Stephen Webster have documented the rise of negative partisanship, where voters are motivated more by dislike of the opposing party than affection of their own. Key findings. In 1980, about 40% of voters expressed very negative views of the opposing party. By 2016, that exceeded to 70%. Voters increasingly report lesser of two evils reasoning. Party loyalty is maintained even when voters dislike their own candidates. Holding my nose, voting has become normalized. The implication. Parties don't need to inspire, they need to frighten. They don't need to offer a vision, they need to present the other side as catastrophic. How this gets exploited. Campaign strategy. Political consultants understand this deeply. Negative advertising works. Studies show negative ads are more memorable, they generate stronger emotional responses, they are more likely to be shared, discussed, they suppress opponent turnout while motivating base. The ratio problem. Campaigns have found that positive messaging must vastly outnumber negative messaging to have equivalent impact. So negative becomes the efficient choice. Media and content strategy. Content creators, including news organizations, understand engagement. What gets shared, outrage at the other side, fear of what they are doing, disgust at opponent behavior, anger at injustice by outgroup. What doesn't get shared, nuanced policy analysis, good news and bipartisan cooperation, complex explanations, both sides have a point framing. Fundraising psychology. Examine political fundraising emails. They almost universally emphasize what you'll lose if you don't donate, what the enemy is doing right now, the threat that must be stopped, the attack being launched. Rarely the positive vision being built, the hope for the future, the constructive policy being proposed. Why? Because fear opens wallets faster than hope. The tribal amplification. Threat perception and group identity. When group identity becomes central to self-concept, Threats to the group feel like threats to the self. The progression. 1. I support Party X preference. 2. I am a Party X member identity. 3. Party X people are my people, tribe. 4. Attacks on Party X are attacks on me, fusion. Once you reach stage 4, any criticism of your party feels personal. This triggers defensive responses that bypass rational evaluation. Outgroup homogeneity. We perceive our own group as diverse individuals, but the opposing group as a monolithic mass. We are complex individuals, well-intentioned despite disagreements, diverse in our views, reasonable with some bad actors. They are all the same, motivated by bad intentions, extreme and unreasonable, represented by their worst examples. This makes it easier to hate them as an abstraction rather than understand them as individuals. Asymmetric perception of threat. Each side perceives the other as more threatening than the other side perceives itself. Research finding. When asked to estimate how extreme the average member of the opposing party is, people dramatically overestimate. Democrats think Republicans are further right than they are. Republicans think Democrats are further left than they are. This perception gap means both sides feel under siege. Both believe they're defending against extremism, which justifies their own escalation. The neurochemistry. The outrage hit. When you encounter content that validates your tribal position and vilifies your opponents, your brain releases dopamine, reward and motivation, you feel right. Cortisol, stress hormone, creates urgency and arousal. Adrenaline, fight or flight activation. This creates a cocktail that feels simultaneously righteous and energizing. It's literally addictive. The calm alternative. Content that offers nuance, complexity, or understanding of the other side produces less dopamine. Where's the victory? Less arousal, no threat to respond to. Cognitive dissonance, uncomfortable complexity. It's not rewarding in the same immediate way, so we scroll past it. In Machiavelli's The Prince, which is about how best to rule people, concerning cruelty and clemency and whether it is better to be loved than feared. Quote, upon this, a question arises, whether it be better to be loved than feared or feared than loved. It may be answered that one should wish to be both, but because it is difficult to unite them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved, when of the two, either must be dispensed with. For love is preserved by the link of obligation which, owing to the baseness of man, is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails. Mind you, this was nearly 500 years ago. And Machiavelli observed that it is safer to be feared than loved, because fear never fails to motivate. Our political system has learned this lesson well. The question is, have we? Thank you. God bless. Much love. And we are in this together. We are the people. We are the many.